So, I was quite astonished today to discover that hashtag fake news has been taken over by the American right on social media as a means of attacking legitimate news outlets such as CNN and Buzzfeed. Shocked because up until that point, fake news was actually a moniker that was usually thrown at the Trump administration and alt-right click farmers as a means of rubbishing and undermining the various lies and post-truths and factoids that have been at the basis of the Trump administration's road to success. Why have the Trump administration then sort of appropriated hashtag fake news? Well, that's because first BuzzFeed and then CNN have published details of a dossier that's actually been doing the rounds since about November of last year, composed by a British spook hired admittedly by the opponents of the Trump administration on the right and the left to sort of undermine and rubbish Trump, that contains credible and extensive evidence to suggest that Donald Trump's position has been compromised quite dramatically by Russian intelligence influence, suggesting effectively that Trump is now in the pocket of the Putin administration. Why has this dossier, which as I said comes from a credible source, suddenly been deemed to be fake news by the American right? Well, to answer that question you've got to ask two sorts of things. First of all, how did it become news, and then why is it determined fake? It's been around since November, so perhaps the more apt question is, why has it only just become news? Why have BuzzFeed only just published the entire contents of the dossier when journalists at The Guardian and the New York Times and other news outlets have had a look at this dossier for a couple of months now? Now, the reason that none of those other news outlets have published the dossier is that newspapers on the whole will not publish information from a source unless it can be corroborated by at least one other credible source. And in the case of the dossier, although the author of the source is credible, and the information seems to be detailed and to some degree cross-checkable to some degree, there isn't a credible second source, and this perhaps relates to the nature of the material and how it was gleaned. We're talking about sensitive intelligence gleaned from Russian intelligence agents, and the only other people who could corroborate that evidence are those Russian intelligence agents, and as you can imagine, they're not in any hurry to step forward to do that. So the reason that the dossier up until yesterday was not deemed news was because it didn't fulfill this basic criterion that it could be corroborated by a credible second source. And what is astonishing yesterday, at least, is that BuzzFeed decided that corroborating a story through a second credible source, which is like the cornerstone or the foundation stone of all professional journalism, is no longer a relevant and apposite test for whether something is or is not news in relation to the challenges facing news journalism in 2017. In other words, they are able to publish the dossier, which is subsequently been called fake news by Donald Trump, due to the impact that fake news has had on American cultural life during the Trump election process. So it is fake news itself that has led BuzzFeed to believe that it is no longer a credible thing to hold off from information simply because you can't corroborate it, when in actual fact everybody's Facebook feed is constantly flooded with all sorts of fake news which can't even be corroborated from one credible source. So why should we necessarily wait to corroborate something from two credible source? That's why the dossier is not become news until today. You might ask a related question. Spies don't necessarily need to corroborate information with a second credible source in order to do something about the information that they have. They are not journalists, and they don't have to be bound by the same journalistic rules. Now, I don't exactly know what the rules are from spycraft, because the only thing I know about spycraft is men in dirty Macs wandering around rainy London in the 1970s that I've gleaned from the occasional John le Carré novels that I've picked up in tawdry bed and breakfast on ill-advised February holiday breaks to the west coast of Ireland. So I don't exactly know what the CIA require, but clearly the CIA will act on fairly uncorroborated sources in a quite significant way, because they intervened on the American election at the very last moment. I think it was 11 days till the final election, with accusations against Hillary Clinton that proved to be unsubstantiated, but that I think most commentators really believe now was the final thing that skewed skew the direction of the American election. So they don't need very much to stick their oar in. So why didn't they stick their oar in when it came to this dossier, which is a much more credible and detailed source than that which led to the questions around Hillary Clinton's email server 11 days before the election? Either way, that's how something does or does not become news. How, therefore, do you determine whether or not something is fake? What is fake in relation to news and in relation to intelligence, in relation to... So what's different about Donald Trump's use of the term fake news, or the right's use of the term fake news, as is all over Twitter today, and the left's use of the term fake? We on the left tend to think that we own the sort of intellectual and moral high ground, at least during the Trump and Brexit political campaigns, because both Trump and Brexit were campaigns that were quite clearly based on lies, and we feel on the left that we always prove our case based on factual correctness first, and, if you like, emotional appeal second. Yet, in actual fact, during the Brexit campaign, there were as many lies perpetuated by the Leave campaign as there were for the Remain campaign. It was a whole campaign based on lies, based on the fact that nobody actually knew what the effects of staying in or leaving the European Union would actually be. If we turn to the Trump campaign, it's very clear, and everybody knows that the Trump campaign and Donald Trump's campaign technique was entirely based on lies, and that people didn't care about that. They didn't vote for Trump's relationship to truth. They voted for Trump's values, and they voted for what they thought Trump would represent or do for them, and they didn't care whether that had any factual basis whatsoever. Fair enough. That's not particularly revelatory. In actual fact, demagogy is the essence of politics, and it's only very, very recently that we've had data-based governance where people have found scientific basis for making decisions. In the past, they simply made decisions on what they felt was right for the people or right for their supporters. So in a sense, we've just gone back 10 to 15 years to how politics used to be, and that's what's thrown a lot of politicians, and it will take them a few years to get around that issue. What's different here about what Trump's doing? Well, what Trump's doing is very, very clever. He's taking the very weapon that was used against him, hashtag fake news, hashtag post-truth, hashtag post-fact, hashtag Trump's a liar, and he's turned the very discourse or the very language and the very medium, Twitter, social media, against the liberal left in a very, very clever way. He's taken fake news as a kind of calling card for everything that's wrong with the media and with the political class, and what he's done is then used it to apply it to legitimate news sources, and this has been aided and abetted by the combination of CNN, which is pretty legitimate, and Buzzfeed, which is pretty illegitimate. What Trump has actually said effectively in his news conference yesterday is that all news that is reported by the news media is fake news, and all news that is reported by other media, for example Twitter, is better because it's not fake news, even though, as we know, the large majority of the stories spread around the social media networks themselves are more likely to be fake news than those that are reported by the mainstream media. It's a killer blow to the mainstream media, and unless they do something about it, their days appear to be numbered. Unless the mainstream media can demonstrate that it can compete with the sexy and also the sexiness and the rapidity of social media generated fake news stories, which are, especially as 60% of Americans get their news now from Facebook, then their days are numbered. There really are not going to be any legitimate news sources in the next 10 years unless they can turn this around. This may be the lasting legacy of Trump's administration. Undermining of the relationship of the Fourth Estate to American democracy is a fundamental killer blow to American democracy, and is going to cause us to entirely reconsider the political culture of America and of advanced democracies, which have been driven entirely by news agenda, 24-hour news agenda, in the past decade or so. This could result in, as many people predict, a complete collapse in democracy, because there will no longer be a Fourth Estate as a check and a balance against the profligacy and excesses of demagogues such as Trump and Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson and so on. That may be the case. Or perhaps it will just be everybody finally accepting that the 24-hour news agenda, which has driven political life both here and across the Atlantic in the US, has actually been the main cause for the collapse of respect and interest in the political class, and that maybe in the end this will be a good thing. Maybe people will start to realise that needing to know news every 10, 20, 30 minutes every hour of the day is the very thing that has generated the pretty pickle of fake news and post-truth that we're in today. Maybe people will simply start to switch off from the news for a while, giving us an attempt to regenerate news and regenerate a kind of confidence in our politicians that is not driven by their newsworthiness, by their meme-worthiness, by which I mean they simply say things which are perfectly repeatable as memes on the internet, and they become more important than their actual convictions. And maybe eventually we will be able to rebuild our democracies based on people saying things that they actually believe, and that they actually want other people to believe and put their trust. Who knows? Watch this space. By the way, everything that I've just told you is fake, because it's all news, and all news is fake news, and I'm fake, and you're fake, and we're all fake, and that's the only true reality that there is.